G'day, I'm Woz.
And I'm Nick, sometimes Coxie, mostly Nick.
This is the Tradies in Business podcast, and we're here to share a bunch of tips, ideas, tactics that you can put in place to get change happening in your trade business right now.
If you're really lucky, we're going to entertain you with a few mum jokes and, more importantly, a bunch of fantastic guests that will educate you in all things you need to know about trade business. But we do promise to do it with a whole bunch of fun along the way.
I'm a self-confessed idiot, so strap yourself in and enjoy another episode.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Tradies in Business podcast. It's a bit weird hearing my voice at the intro. Normally, you'd be hearing Warwick's. And as we have briefed you before, Warwick's out for a period of time as he recovers from a health complication. He's doing quite well, though. And so today I'm jumping into the driver's seat. Very strange for you all, also strange for me. What isn't strange and is actually very exciting is today we're going to be talking about leadership. It's a topic that you all ask us to talk about quite frequently. And my guest today, Danny, from Lead Like a Legend, who has an amazing accent that you're all going to enjoy with me as well, is going to be talking through some difficult conversations and how to approach difficult conversations rather than ignoring them like so many of us do. Danny is the founder of Lead Like a Legend. She has online programs and workshops and one-on-one coaching to help small business owners just like you develop your management skills to build a team that you can trust and they trust one another so that you can step back from the daily operations and live your dream as a business owner, very much in line with what we talk about here at Tradies in Business. Danny, hello and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on today, and really excited to be able to share such a valuable topic and something that I know a lot of people do struggle with. So let's get into it.
I would love to hear how you came to do what you're doing. Like, leadership is not a concept that we're necessarily taught a huge amount at school. I think as we go through senior schooling, it starts to become apparent to us. But to be clearly, there's a life journey that has brought you to this point where you are helping business owners understand leadership and what that looks like. Can you tell us a bit about that, Danny?
Yeah, absolutely. So I traveled the world for 10 years and I studied hospitality management initially. So all of the countries that I lived in, I would find a hospitality management job. So I managed hotels, bars, restaurants, a big catering and functions events business where I had 50 staff. And I was sort of doing that on a consistent basis. I actually lived in 8 countries in 10 years. So just traveling a lot. And what I found is that people of all different backgrounds, all different cultures, fundamentally are the same. And so I started to really notice the patterns in human behavior. And it became really interesting to me how to relate. And also I was learning different languages. So my communication improved through that. And then I got a job as a wilderness guide in the tourism sector in New Zealand. And I was taking people up to 3,000 meters in groups of sort of 10 to 15 people. So I always had the mentality of all hands on deck. In those situations, you've got to brief people really well. You've got to give them a lot of empathy and compassion, but also help them get to the top of the friggin' mountain. It's big.
It's a challenge in itself.
It's a big challenge for a lot of people, and keeping that positive mindset, trying to understand where people's thinking is so that you can give them their next step or help them understand themselves so that they can take action. And so there was a lot of sort of combined skills that I gathered within that 10 years. And then when COVID hit, I thought to myself, okay, what am I going to do with all of this knowledge? And the tourism and hospitality sector was almost dead. And so I started my coaching diploma in Melbourne, actually, a 3-year coaching certificate, and launched my business.
It's amazing. What a journey. And what an amazing background you have. I love travel, and I have never been gutsy enough, and we're talking a little bit about confidence and taking a big leap today. I've never been gutsy enough to do it on my own. I can't imagine traveling the world, 8 countries in 10 years, did you say? And learning new languages and really embracing yourself in the local culture, then you would have to. And I find it really fascinating then to think about what you would have learnt around communication during that time, because so much of it isn't the words that come out of our mouths, and so much of it is really within the physicality. And I think when you have the opportunity to spend time with people whose language you don't naturally speak, you learn so much more about how you can pick up on a conversation without even understanding a word that's being said. I have family who are Dutch. For a long time, I didn't understand what they were saying, but you get really quickly, we use our hands when we talk, our bodies, our posture changes. You can really pick up on the tone of the conversation, so much so that now, many, many years later, if my Dutch family have conversations, I can nearly always understand what they're saying, and I still don't necessarily understand a bunch of Dutch. So I wonder, there's a lot of skills that come across with that opportunity to work in different countries. Can you explain to us, maybe take us back to when you first started traveling and you were going into foreign speaking countries? What was that like? Was it really scary not understanding many of the words? When you're being placed in charge of these people, how did you, the early communication, what did that look like?
Yeah, well, honestly, it was really challenging at the beginning because you're a fish out of water, it's completely new environment. And what I learned was that you've got to start somewhere, because I had this rule called the big 3. And within 3 months, I would have friends, a job, and an apartment. And once you've got those 3 things, you feel like you're living somewhere. But to get to the big 3 was just contacting people, potentially friends of friends, and starting there, or joining activities and groups. And I just had to expose myself a lot. And a lot of the conversations were like at a bar, there was a lot of beer drunk while I was in Europe. And luckily I am extroverted, but I just needed to embrace the suck, because it was really hard to be in a room full of people that understand each other and not get why they're laughing. But slowly and surely, as I just kept on embracing this attitude, it meant that I got better and better, and the understanding of those cultural norms became more familiar. Because like the Dutch, for example, they'll tell it to you straight.
Yeah, that's really true.
And that is a very beautiful quality of the Dutch.
Yes.
But I noticed from being able to be in those environments that I could kind of step back and think, okay, what is a cultural norm? How do I fit in with that? And actually the Dutch, they love puns.
Yes, they do.
They love puns. And so I became really funny when I was living in the Netherlands, because I made it my mission to be as punny as possible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Simple things, though. Those simple little observations that you can turn into a skill that you can acquire can really change up your opportunity for communication. And that's very much leadership.
Yeah, totally. And also having no idea and just trying something. Because a lot of people hold themselves back from even trying.
Yep.
And eventually I just got used to people correcting me and people laughing at me, or, these little things where I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's hilarious. I have no idea what I just said.
Yeah. I think you've actually just uncovered something that has really been resonating with me recently. And that's I think to be a great leader, you need to learn how to be very vulnerable. And this is only my opinion. I don't work in the leadership space. I may be totally wrong. And as I observe those that I would consider good leaders around me, the commonality I see in all of them is the opportunity to show up when things are hard, to call themselves out when they're uncomfortable, or to have those kind of vulnerable conversations you were just talking about, where you're opening yourself up to what feels like ridicule or criticism from those around you whose language you didn't speak. And I think that's a big part of how to demonstrate leadership. It's a doing. It's not it's a combination of doing and being. And through allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, I'm seeing people get amazing results from the people around them because of what they're choosing to share. Is that just my experience, Danny, or do you believe that's a truth?
100% a truth, because I feel that vulnerability is when we're connecting from the heart space. And especially when we're in a business environment, it's all about your head and the processes and, the standards, and really heady.
Yep.
But when you can say, hey, honestly, I don't know how to have this conversation, but I'm going to try. That is pure vulnerability. Because you start by going from your heart to the other person's heart and resonating with them.
I almost feel like that makes that entire conversation easier to have when you're calling yourself out, because if we get to what we're talking about today, and a big part of that is having difficult conversations that so many of us try to avoid. Unfortunately, they land at your feet in one way or another. We're uncomfortable. Nobody likes it. No, I've never met anybody that truly loves confrontation or truly loves having those really challenging conversations. And I think when we call ourselves out, we're giving ourselves permission to almost make a meal of it, and that's okay because we're just doing the best that we can. But likewise, the receiver of the conversation, the person that is there actively conversing with you, also feels more relaxed because they're not thinking, oh, they've come prepared with all of this information and I'm about to be slammed. It's just that, look, this is an uncomfortable moment we both need to move through to get to the end. Is that is there a framework to having difficult conversations and that's part of the framework, or is that just a natural vulnerability that can start to have a better result when we're having those tough conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk to you later about the framework that I use called Pace, Pace, Lead, but that I call it setting the frame, setting the expectation. Like, I have no idea how this is going to go, or I'm not used to giving people feedback, or, we're mates and now I'm your boss and I've got to just tell you this.
Yeah.
That's setting the frame. It's like permission to suck.
Yeah.
And that is part of it.
I think that's a great concept, setting the frame. So how do we do this, Danny? Well, maybe we should talk about why we avoid it first. Why do we avoid, and I'm almost giving away the answer, the difficult conversations? Obviously, they're uncomfortable, but is there a bigger thing here going on that we try to avoid those hard conversations?
Oh, 100%. And it actually dates back to when we're all younger. And I learned this recently, and it's fascinating because we saw our parents in conflict in the lounge and the kitchen, unresourcefully yelling at each other. And so that we saw conflict. And as a 6 or 7-year-old, it's so scary.
Yes.
And then what happens is the parents go to bed and they're in their room, and then there's the pillow talk, like, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way, or what I actually want is this, but I said this. Those kind of repair conversations is how people get back on track. But children never see that.
No.
They only see conflict that is scary. And so we don't get modeled how to have resourceful conversations that are heartfelt without the flare of anger. And a lot of us grow up conflict avoidant because it's too much of a step to learn how to have those repair conversations, because quite often you're with someone else that also avoids conflict, and then there's just absolute chaos. But as we learn and grow through small moments and small vulnerabilities, then we can actually build our reference for, oh, actually, that wasn't that bad. But as business owners, we quite often go into, we're running our teams and we don't know the people. It's really hard to be vulnerable. You have no idea what the other people's backgrounds are. Have they ever been given feedback before? No, everyone's environment's different and everyone's relatively guarded, especially in New Zealand and Australia, where there's like sort of that tall poppy surface level, trying to keep the peace, like don't rock the boat. There's a lot of cultural norms that you're going against as a leader, and that's why it's so hard.
It's I've never heard it put that way, and it makes so much sense now. And I can recall parenting classes where they're being told that it's okay to disagree with your partner, but you must show your children how to move through the conflict. Now it's all landing for me. I've never thought about it and pulled it all together before, and it just fascinates me how we are predisposed to having these subconscious thoughts that then turn up in our businesses, and we've got no idea why we were avoiding the conflict. I think that's a great way to pull it together. And of course, then we don't know how. If we've never been taught how to fix the conflict that we've had or move through the conversation to the point where it's no longer uncomfortable, we've come up with some sort of resolution, then why would we don't even know that actually happens because we've never seen it. And so I guess that's where a framework comes into place to be able to assist the learning of how to have some of those uncomfortable conversations. And is it a bit of a natural journey? Like are there particular steps that we need to take to get to the end of that outcome? And is it always going to be uncomfortable, or is it something that we can finally move through and find, a space where we're maybe not comfortable, but more prepared to be having those hard conversations?
Yeah, well, ideally we would unpack our childhood and be able to work with a counselor or a coach or a therapist who can help us understand that conflicts avoidance, because it's a protection mechanism. That feeling that you get in your belly when you go to give someone feedback, that feeling like, oh, this is awful, I do not want to have this conversation, that is never going to go away, because our subconscious inherently needs to protect us from the vulnerabilities. And so that's always going to be there. But knowing that that exists, knowing that it is a protection mechanism, helps us to be able to, as leaders, take a breath, remembering that we can get into the parasympathetic nervous system and allow ourselves to really center, and then we can go into a conversation. But what tends to happen is you're busy as, the to-do list, and you're flying out the door, and then you see the person you want to have the conversation with, you haven't taken time to center, and then you go into a chat that's going to turn out really badly. That makes the record worse, then you tell yourself this is even worse than you thought it was going to be.
Yes.
But then we haven't taken responsibility as leaders to first center ourselves, think about, okay, this person is really aggravating me because of the way that they behaved. Is that potentially about them, or is it maybe about me? And then asking ourselves, did that person have everything they needed to be able to complete the job successfully? Because quite often this stuff happens in the hiring process. Like, people are brought on and they have no idea that you want them to do X, Y, and Z, or they don't know that you're going to be giving them feedback all the time because you need them to perform to a certain standard.
I think one of the things I see missing is business owners not prepared to receive feedback when they go into those conversations. So, and I think you've just referenced that, in that quite frequently when a client brings to me an issue they're having with one of their team members, I can identify, and this is only through experience and listening to lots of these problems over years. And I think when we learn to pull ourselves outside of the business and the emotional connection we have to the outcome that we're creating, you can start to see this for yourself in your own business as well. And for the most part, they can't. They can't necessarily see, they haven't set their team member up for success with that task, or they have hired incorrectly because it's not quite the right person and they were feeling pressured or rushed, or they've taken on the wrong client. And so that client is now causing them a lot of stress. And so, we talk a lot in the program about being above the line, taking ultimate responsibility for everything that's happening for you in business, because that allows you the opportunity for choice in creating change. So you don't have to have that conflict moving forward. And I think there's a great opportunity as a business owner to work, like, this is the little silent bits of leadership that people don't understand that they're working within every single day of what they're doing. If you can pull yourself out of that emotional space and look and think, as you've just demonstrated, do they have a position description? Do they understand what their role is? Is the task that we've expected them to do, has it been clearly communicated in a way that they actually understand what the outcome needs to be? Do they have all the tools and equipment required so that they can perform the task at hand? And if they didn't understand any of the ones above, where did the responsibility for that ultimately fall? Was it because the team member didn't understand the directions that were given? Well, believe it or not, that's actually your fault as the business owner, because you haven't sought to understand whether they understood you. They're little tiny steps that I think that we miss quite frequently, and it's a skill that I believe is developed over time in business. And yet, Denny, I think you've put it so eloquently and well. We're stuck on this circle when we don't like, and we don't want to deal with confrontation. We keep falling into those gaps where we're actually creating it for ourselves anyway. Is there a way in which we can set ourselves up to be able to look more openly as a business owner prior to going into those conversations to ensure that, okay, is this conversation one that really needs to happen? Or should I be taking responsibility for what happened and helping to create more information? And is there, is a large part of that being vulnerable in those conversations and just being okay with the feedback that I then receive, because maybe I didn't give them all the information required?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a big mindset shift there in going in with a curiosity rather than an assumption. Because if we assume that someone did it wrong because they suck, that's really, you're going in with a lot of negative energy But if you go, okay, well, that was a really big muck up of that person. I just really want to find out what went wrong and how we can change this. That we energy is really important in those conversations. And so the model that I teach called pace, lead has 3 stages of conversation, because we don't want to go in hot straight away. Otherwise the person will shut down. We know that when they just put up the block. And the first conversation is always asking them, hey, what happened here? What's going on? Or share with me your thinking around this. Because you've got to give the person the benefit of the doubt. People don't inherently want to do wrong. They probably just haven't learned, or they weren't given the right instructions, or maybe Jimmy told him to do it that way. You don't know until you have that curious mindset. So that's always the first conversation. And a lot of people think that you have to go from sort of 0 to like serious feedback conversation, but there's so many layers in between. And that first layer is curiosity. Then if you see the same or similar behavior come up again, then you come to the next pace conversation. And that is, hey, we've already had a chat about this. And then being really clear with your expectations and outcomes and saying, like, if this happens again, we're going to have a feedback conversation.
Yeah.
So it's putting a little bit more pressure on. You're saying, hey, we've chatted about it. I haven't seen change. Now I need you to show me that you're committed to this. And we're going to check back in again in 2 weeks' time. Or I need you to come to my office at the end of the week just so that we can talk about how your jobs went. So it's a little bit more accountability. And then we can also be aware that when we have done those 2 steps, you've given the person the opportunity to pull up their socks.
Yes.
Or not. And if they haven't, then you go into the next lead conversation, which would be a half an hour one-to-one. And there's another framework that I teach for this, which helps you to be able to understand what are the actual barriers stopping that person from being able to show up for themselves. And is this job what they really want? Is this role what they really want? Maybe you need them to succeed in this role in a certain way, but they're not there yet. And so there's a bit of a mismatch. And so maybe there's another role you could put them in where it's easier for them to just do the tasks that's basic and you don't need them to change. But that half an hour window is taking the time to really uncover the blocks and go deeper with that person and then decide, are they a match or not for that position or for your company, right? So yeah, I can think it's just being aware that there's multiple stages to those conversations, because we need to nip the behavior in the bud consistently, because if we don't, next minute it's 6 months later and you could have made a better decision about putting someone else in that role.
That's right.
Or you didn't know that they were missing training. Just nipping the behavior in the bud means that you can actually make some new decisions in the future.
It's a brilliant framework for somebody who, particularly for people that are really avoidant to these hard conversations. They're little bite-sized pieces till you get to the big, harder chat. And for me, listening to you just now, I'm thinking, oh, okay, so the team member's kind of given you permission for the hard chat. It takes away a lot of the responsibility of the hard chat because they've not improved their performance in the way that you have requested. So it almost allows that conversation to play out without you having to feel quite so much that it's a conversation of conflict, because you've come and started that entire process with a curiosity, which I love. And it's something I keep forgetting is the curiosity and understanding, because that's your opportunity for you to receive feedback as well, I feel, is in that curious conversation. But also when we start to approach potential conflict through curiosity, it means it doesn't feel like a conflict at all to either of you, because you're just seeking to understand. That's all you're looking for, is an understanding.
Yeah, well said. What I do find sometimes is that people, when they hire a family member or they hire someone they know, and they're sort of stuck in a rut with that person. And so emotionally, when you can change that and come from a curious angle, you kind of get out of the rut of needing to have a straight lead conversation with them when you're not ready to do that yet.
Yep. I love that framework. I think it's a fantastic concept. We talk about hard conversations, and yet I also see a real avoidance to have positive conversations about performance of team members. And I wonder if it's because it just feels uncomfortable to do so. And you referenced earlier Australia, New Zealand, we have this tall poppy mindset where we like to keep everybody on an even keel. We don't want to build anyone up too much or drag them down too much, like we're really in the middle. Is there a reason you think that we avoid as a whole, and I'm asking you to speak quite generally, and maybe it's not true in your experience, maybe you've seen something very different. Have you experienced that there is almost a resistance to give positive feedback as well? And if so, why do you think that happens?
Yeah, because again, it's coming from the heart. And when you are acknowledging someone, which because of the tall poppy syndrome feels weird because we need to be humble, and especially in New Zealand, and we need to be seen that we're just doing what we can to be part of the team. And you don't want to stick your head up above the others and be acknowledged. So there is this general feeling of awkwardness. And I find that a lot of business owners think that their team members are doing a good job, but they don't realize how important it is to specifically reinforce the behaviors that they want to continue to see.
Yes. I think we talk a lot about team members being like children. And for anybody that's on listening to the podcast who has kids, you'll know exactly what I mean. We we want to reward the behavior that we want to see more of. We don't necessarily want to ignore the negative behavior, but coming at it with a curious mindset really creates a difference and a change. And I think we underestimate how important it is for our team members to understand what good performance looks like. And we also need to be setting boundaries, just like we do with our children, because when the boundaries are tight, they don't have as far to flex out, which creates better performance for your team, which creates a better outcome for you. I think that there's a lot of little things that we do in leadership or through leadership that create this better outcome. But Danny, for those who are listening and they think, people talk all the time about leadership and it sounds like this big scary thing and what really is a leader. Can you maybe take us through the fundamentals of leadership when it comes to being a business owner?
Absolutely. And the first one that comes to mind is modeling, because you can't expect people to do what you are not prepared to do yourself. And all behavior trickles down from the top, just like that, being open to feedback. If you're defensive as a business owner, you can't be giving your team members feedback because you're going to feel resistance. It's going to feel awful because you're projecting onto them how awful it's going to feel because you hate it.
Yes.
And for me, my mission is to help leaders balance life and leadership, making sure, like you said, it's so important to live their best life. Because if they're living their best life, then they're taking consistent breaks so that they can show up wholeheartedly. They are doing things that fill their cup on the weekends so that when they show up on Monday, they're really excited to be there. Making sure that they are developing themselves on the side so that they are a continuous improvement, because our growth plateaus if we are not being challenged or supported to grow. And then our team members need us to grow them. And so then our team members' growth plateaus because our growth hasn't continued. So I think it's just the metaphor of living your best life is showing up like you mean it. Don't just twiddle your thumbs and tick the box, because that's not leadership, right?
I love that. I don't think leadership's as complicated as we have all decided that it must be. And I think the big concept here that I think many of our listeners might not really understand is that you're leading whether you're being conscious about it or not. And so you have an opportunity to create a different outcome here. If you're not happy with what you're currently getting through your leadership, whether it be through your clients or through your team members, if you don't like your current outcome, there's a way you can change it. And a big part of that, you are already working down that road by listening to the podcast, because we're bringing you education and ideas and new concepts for you to be consuming all of the time. So that is a part of your journey. but actively seeking some assistance in these areas can really start to change what you're currently experiencing. So, Danny, for those listeners that are hanging in today and thinking, yeah, I don't like my current reality, I need to make some changes here, I'm not getting out of my team what I need, or I'm not living my best life, I'm not enjoying what I do, I certainly don't feel enthusiastic to turn up to work on a Monday, how do our listeners go about finding you?
So my website's www.leadlikealegend.co.nz, and I do offer a 1 hour, it's a strategy call to help you understand what your blocks are as a leader. And just as we've spoken about today, with curiosity, work through some of these challenges together so that I can map out what I foresee with your input would be a really good way for you to start building those skills. And then they can take it and run if they decide they want to do it on their own, or they can work with me on a 6-month program. And 6 months really gives us enough time to understand the fundamentals of that leader and who they are and who they want to be, and then build on those skills, but also unravel the emotional blocks underneath the surface that are really causing these undesirable outcomes or things that are happening that we really want to see change. And not because it changes the way that life happens. Life is still going to happen,
Yes.
but because it changes our perspective. And it's just those small and seemingly insignificant shifts that really do lead us to more freedom and more contentment and ultimately a better work-life balance.
I love that, Danny. Thank you. Listeners, if you want to learn how to lead like a legend, check out the show notes. I'll make sure all of the links are there so that you can reach out to Danny and have a chat. Surely you want to reach out and just listen to her beautiful accent. If nothing else, let's get the conversation started. I could sit and listen to you all day. Danny, thank you so much for joining me on what is such an important topic and something we get questions about all of the time. I feel like we've had a really different insight today around leadership and having some of those challenging conversations and just how easy it could be. I love Pace Lead. That's a fantastic framework. And I reckon a lot of our listeners would get a bunch out of learning the framework for that half an hour conversation, because as leaders, we're going to have plenty of those, unfortunately. But it's a great opportunity for you to start to flex out your skills. Danny, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Nick. It's been awesome.
Thank you for listening.